Now that you've found UBN Radio and discovered our quality talk shows, it's time to spread the word to friends, family, and the universe. 24 hours of music and talk. Radio without limits. That's why people keep coming back for more. That's ubnradio.com.
Good morning, and welcome to the Larry Yates As Is show. We're so delighted that you are watching us, listening to us from around the world. I know that we have listeners and viewers from all over, from Germany, from South Africa, down to the lands of Mississippi and the west coast of California. This is the Larry Yates As Is show. And Larry is not here today. He's getting ready to get on the road again. And this is the faithful co-host, Reverend Carolyn Wilkins. And I'm delighted to be here today. We're excited to have a wonderful show. And our guest is Ramona Bridges. And we'll be speaking with her in just a few minutes. She has a wonderful story about her life and what she's experienced in life and how she has overcome. I think the title I put on the newsletter was From Homelessness and Mental Illness to Victory. So we're looking forward to a conversation with her. And I wanted to first begin. We can't help but look at the news. We've been a politically oriented show, and Larry just loves having this kind of conversation every day, and when we reach out to you on a weekly basis. And there are letters and notes that come in from people who share their thoughts. And I know that there are conversations now about the last debate. Now, I watched the last debate, and then at some point I stopped watching because I was uncomfortable and didn't know why I was uncomfortable. A part of what I was hearing was really kind of the same information, same conversation, although there was one with one tone and one with another. But what I later discovered, and this is so interesting, is the impact of visual effect, is that I watched Trump stand over Hillary Clinton, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I was literally reacting to this bulk of a person standing over a woman. And I was also reacting to his pacing. And I thought maybe it was just me, but he looked like he was a caged person. I've been to zoos and other things, and I've watched animals who don't like being caged up. And that's what he reminded me of. I'm not calling Trump, I wouldn't be that way of calling him an animal. But the behavior was one of someone being so angry, so upset, so out of control that they were pacing back and forth. And I didn't realize that while I was watching and having these feelings, that the rest of the world was having a similar reaction. It was a visceral reaction that let us all be uncomfortable with the movement. And when you go back to previous elections and when they've done these programs, what they find is that the visual part of the program can make or break a candidate. So debates are more than just the words. And that was one of the phrases he used in response to the videotape that came out about his comments in the bus. Those are just words. It wasn't anything that I did. And it reminded me actually of a joke that someone told me several years ago that I still chuckle about. And I'm going to clean up the joke and try to share it with you, and maybe you'll see the similarity. But I was told about this gentleman and a husband and wife who lived in the South. And they had a wonderful relationship, had been married many years, but at the same time, they both had a little fling on the side. And they were so good at tiptoeing on each other that they never seemed to have it as a problem. And they never ran into each other. But one particular night, they happened to wind up at the same motel, the same day, the same time. And the husband wound up completing sooner than the wife, and he went outside and saw her car, and he ran back in to his room. And he was going to get his things, and when he came back out, his wife was outside waiting for him. And he completely denied that he was involved in anything. In fact, when they got home, he told her, "Baby, you didn't even see me. I wasn't there. That must have been a dream you had or your imagination." And that reminds me of this campaign, that even though the wife with her own eyes saw the husband not only at the hotel, but saw his car and saw this other person, he totally denied his involvement. So I hope you get a chuckle out of that. I know I didn't tell it as well as the person who told me, because they added a lot of innuendos and other things that I can't say right now. But you're welcome to repeat that story if it gives you a chuckle, and look at what we're doing today, because we are being treated as though the wool is being pulled over our eyes, that we can't see what we see, and that we don't hear the words that we're hearing. So it's like the story of the king and the story that used to be told about the emperor and his new clothes. And I believe most of your children have probably not heard that story, but look it up and tell them about the emperor and his new clothes, and they may get a kick out of that in relationship to politics right now. So I'm not going to defer anymore. I just wanted to add a sense of humor because there's so much upset. I hear people say to me on a day-to-day basis, I don't even want to watch the news. I want to stay away from it. I don't want to hear all the bantering that's going on. But I encourage you all to keep listening because you want to know what is happening so you can stay abreast of it, and be sure to vote. Vote early, but be sure to vote. Do not give your vote away. I said this the last few times I've been on. Make sure your vote counts this year, regardless of who you choose to vote for. But so many people have died for the vote. Make yours count. So we're going to move now into another conversation with our special guest. And I'd like you to welcome Ramona Bridges. Would you give her an applause, please?
Thank you very much, Carolyn.
And I met Ramona at the Agape Center that I attend. And she and I wound up having a long conversation one day. And I hadn't planned to have as long a conversation, but I got engaged with her, and she started telling me about her life. And I was really fascinated, amazed, and inspired by what she told me. So what I'd like you to do, Ramona, is give them a sense of, first, who you are, where you grew up, and then we'll talk a little bit about this journey of yours.
Okay. I was born in Austin, Texas. Mm-hmm. When my parents got divorced in 1969, my mom moved my siblings and myself here to Los Angeles. So I've been in Los Angeles long enough to go to high school, all-girls Catholic high school, Regina Chaley, and Pomona College, one of the Claremont colleges. Mm-hmm. So,
And what did you study in college?
Psychology.
Oh, beautiful. Okay.
I have a BA in psychology. Yes.
Yes. I remember reading something about
Right.
that. And what did you gather while you were going to school in Pomona? Those of you who don't live in this area, Pomona is east of Los Angeles, about 30 miles. And there's actually a complex of about 5 colleges in the area that share geography. It's a wonderful environment for school.
I was actually an athlete when I was attending Pomona, and I got interested in the social sciences. I thought I wanted to be a doctor when I grew up, like my famous uncle, but that didn't work out for me. So I decided that I needed to take a look at that, and then I got quite interested in African American studies as well. While I was at Pomona, and I had the pleasure of studying under Dr. Agnes Jackson when I was at Pomona as well.
Oh, excellent. And did they have an extensive African American studies program?
They had
because
started.
I don't see. I mean,
at
Pomona
that time,
was
right,
not.
right.
Just so you understand my question, there's not as much diversity as you go east of Los Angeles. Right. And at the time you were going to school, I know there was even less diversity.
Well, Pomona actually recruited me out of Regina Chaley at the time, and at that particular time, what was going on was they were coming to the inner cities recruiting people for scholarships and the like. So I was blessed enough to be able to get a state scholarship as well to attend Pomona. At the time, there was a Black Studies program, but that was the only other thing. And I got a little involved with some campus demonstrations when because they were getting ready to eliminate the Black Studies program. So that was something that I didn't want to see happen.
Yes. Oh, wonderful. So as we move fast forward,
okay,
what's the next part of your journey you want to share with us?
Well, I consider myself to be a very spiritual person, Reverend Carolyn, and I don't want to say it in a particular way, but, I was brought up Catholic, and Catholic for my mom and my family is a very rich kind of heritage.
Yes.
And I found myself drifting away from that when I was in college because it wasn't appealing to my intellect. And I found it to be rote, not to be bashing the Catholic Church. But I found when I first came to L.A., and I was going to church with my mom, to mostly African-American churches, the experience was a little different because it was, gospel music. I even sang in church. And as I got older and went away for a while, I moved up to Oregon for 3 or 4 years and came back to L.A. I found that the Catholic Church wasn't really meant for me. I attended Unity Fellowship Church for a while, and I found that even that purview was too limited for me, and I ended up at Agape because of the diversity.
Well, part of what I found in talking to hundreds of people who come across my path, maybe thousands, there's something that happens when we go into our teen years.
Right.
There's something that happens when we go to college. And it almost doesn't matter what religion you were in, we questioned it.
Right.
Because as we are expanding and growing and thinking and reading, we become more interested in seeing what other options there are.
Right.
So I know a lot of people who may have begun in the Catholic religion, reached out and did things more mystical or metaphysical, and have now gone back to their own religion to deepen themselves,
Right.
and vice versa. So now I believe that because you are a woman of faith, that really has shown up in our conversations as well as what I've read about you and just being around you. So tell us what the beginning of some of the challenges and tragedies were in your life.
Well, I guess it kind of began in the 90s when I was diagnosed as being bipolar, and that was the result of my long-term relationship ending and my brother being diagnosed as HIV positive. So that made me turn, deep within so far as my faith was concerned. And I found that as I grew spiritually, I, was on a different kind of journey, even so far as work was concerned. To coin a phrase Reverend Michael used, it got to the point where I felt like I was working behind enemy lines. And that's not, again, bashing my employer. I just, grew up spiritually. And a lot of times I felt that the people that I was surrounded by weren't of the same kind of consciousness.
So when you said you were diagnosed bipolar,
Yes.
why don't you share what that really means? Because we hear it often and it's thrown about.
Right.
But what did that diagnosis really mean? What were they saying about you, and how did that impact you?
Okay. What it meant at that particular time was that I was in a deep depressed state as a result of what I stated earlier, and I was on heavy medications, and I couldn't work at the time for a while. I was off work for about a year before I was able to go back.
So bipolar, from a psychological standpoint,
right.
What is the actual diagnosis?
Well, you can be manic depressive in terms of being bipolar. So there's certain triggers that are associated with being bipolar. For me, it's usually lack of sleep and stress, and of course, if you're not taking your meds.
Okay. So there's medications that are usually
That is correct.
Encouraged.
Right.
I know from a lot of the media, there are more people being diagnosed as bipolar now than there were
Right.
at that time.
Right.
So did you consider yourself in a unique position? Were there people around you who had similar diagnoses?
At that time, Reverend Carolyn, they weren't. I felt like I was really kind of all by myself
Yeah,
in
that's
terms
what I
of being,
imagined.
diagnosed and having anybody to talk to. The field of psychology in that particular realm has come a long way, because they have a whole new DSM.
Yes.
So far as psychology is concerned, with different types of diagnoses. So,
Did your parents understand what that meant?
I don't think necessarily that they did. And I even have a sister that's paranoid schizophrenic, so we've had to deal with that in my family for quite some time, but my father looked at it very negatively, and my mother, on the other hand, was very supportive. With me going through, unfortunately, some of the changes that I went through when I got sick, and my family as well were very supportive when I got sick on several occasions, because there was a long period of time where I didn't have any kind of episode at all, and that was recently when I was homeless. I hadn't been getting sick or in any kind of on a 72-hour hold for quite some time.
So I heard a couple of things in there, and I hope you don't mind me
No,
stepping
not
a
at all.
little bit
It needs to be talked about.
into your business.
It needs to be talked about.
You talk about it in your story, but you said 72-hour hold. So
Right.
I know that is something that happens, that the police are able to, if you have an encounter with the police and they deem that you may be having a psychotic event or situation, that the law allows them to put you in the system for 72 hours for observation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So you've had that experience.
Multiple times.
Multiple times.
Multiple times.
So are you willing to share that experience with
sure.
you? And what did it mean, and how did it feel? And
well, when I was sick, living out in Lancaster, which was where I physically was living, which kind of made it difficult, to have a good support system. I was initially on a 72-hour hold, but I wasn't in any kind of facility. I was at home. The first time after that, I was working, I think, for the LA Gay and Lesbian Center, and I was put on a 72-hour hold, and then I was hospitalized, but I was immediately released after the 72-hour hold.
Now, was that initiated by the employer or by someone else?
If I remember correctly, when I was hospitalized at Kaiser, it may have been initiated. That's been so long ago. It may have been initiated by the employer. I was out on disability leave at one time when I was working with the LA Gay and Lesbian Center. So I don't recall being arrested or anything like that during that period of time, because the first time I was arrested was during my bout with homelessness, and there were multiple 72-hour holds that I had to go through.
So at some point you became homeless?
That's correct. I lost my apartment, and then I lost my car as a result of not taking my meds. And during that period of time, I had a work comp claim and a disability claim pending, and I was busy taking care of everybody else instead of taking care of myself.
That is so interesting. My heart is really open for you right now. And when we look at so many situations today where people are impacted with mental illness and mental health issues, I think most of the country does not know how to work with it. That people are not given the tools or the conversation. We often see situations with the police where they're encountering somebody who may have a mental disability, and they don't know quite what to do, or they're not sure what the symptoms are and don't have enough training in the conversation. So I applaud you for being willing to have the strength and courage to be on this show today and to share your journey, because everyone's not willing to do that. And I honor who you are, that you've gone through this journey, that you have seen your life like a roller coaster, really. Right. And at the same time, you're here strong and able to tell the story.
Right. I appreciate that.
There's nothing more profound than sharing the experience, because you could have had the experience and pushed it away so that others won't know. And because some people who have gone through this, and I've talked to them and counseled them, may have a sense of shame
Right.
with what is going on. So what has made you have a sense of boldness and willingness to share your story?
Well, there's such a stigma involved, and just talking about it. A lot of people don't want to talk about it, and unfortunately, I think in my particular case, what's happened a lot is people have seen the before and after, and they're still stuck in the before and can't see the after. But I credit me being able to get through that whole dilemma that I had with, my homelessness and mental illness, having a good, I guess, faith-based idea of what I wanted to be kind of when I grew up spiritually. So agape is the reason for that, and I had to tell myself multiple times I had been going to church there for over 25 years for nothing. So I guess that would be, the crux of what I would have to say about that.
Yes. And I want to say a footnote to the listeners that this is not an advertisement so much for Agape, even though I also am a minister there. It's really more your own spiritual community or a community. So what Ramona is sharing with us is that by her spending time in a spiritual environment or faith-based environment, it helped her get through the challenges and also gave her a safe place to land as she was coming out of it.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So again, I'm going to ask you to step us through a couple of things. Homelessness. So when you first found out you were homeless, or you weren't able to pay, was it because you couldn't pay the rent?
Right. They had started an eviction process, and what had happened was I filed my state disability claim so late. I was already, behind with everything, so I had to play catch up, and I wasn't in a position to play catch up, so I had already lost my apartment. And unfortunately, out of ignorance, I could have been sleeping in my car, and I didn't, so I lost the car as well.
That's a tough road to go.
Right.
So what was your response when what was the first thing you did besides the faith part? Who did you go ask for help?
At Agape, it was basically Thelma Chichester.
Well,
and,
we don't want to mention names
Okay.
and organizations.
And Reverend, okay.
No. So so you became homeless
Right.
in the last 5 years or so?
Right, 2013 and 2014.
Okay. So in that time, you wound up asking for assistance
Right.
with an organization,
Right.
and they directed you to
transitional housing.
Okay. All right. And transitional housing in the county or the city of Los Angeles?
In the city of Los Angeles.
Okay. And I know that there are several organizations that support transitional housing
Right.
to assist the homeless. And right now, in fact, Mark Ridley Thomas, who's the county supervisor, president of the county supervisors, has pushed a large campaign for support of greater opportunities for building facilities in the homeless environment, as well as the mayor is stepping up to set aside some land and property to make available for building some relief for the homeless situation. Now, actually, Los Angeles and Southern California area houses over 70% of the homeless in the country.
Right.
I should say California does, because of the warmth and the environment. But then there are people who are here who aren't coming from other places that are here that wind up losing their home, like yourself.
Right.
So you were able to get transitional housing.
Right.
And how long were you in a transitional home?
I was in and out of transitional housing because I lost my transitional housing a couple of times because I ended up getting sick and then being back on the street and getting incarcerated, and then it was like a kind of a swinging door for a while between 2013 and 2014 until I finally had some stability in transitional housing, and then ended up renting a room.
So how did one lead to the other? So you wound up being homeless, you got transitional housing, and what occurred did something occur that put you back into the hospital or something and you lost the housing? Or is the transitional housing something you have to be qualified for every night?
No, the transitional housing, usually the way that it works in Los Angeles is it's $500 a month for to be in a shared room with someone. And what was going on with me at the time is my mail was discombobulated, and I wasn't getting my mail in order to get the checks that I should have been receiving from work comp and state disability, and it took the post office quite some time to get that
to find you,
to find me and to get that all straightened out, and I was finally able to get a UPS box.
Okay, so I know you all can identify with this. If you change addresses or move, it's sometimes hard for the mail to keep up with you, and if you're in a situation where you've lost your home, your place to stay, then probably identifying and contacting all of those organizations was not the easiest thing. Is that correct?
Right. It took me quite some time. And I was in the middle of retiring from the state of California. So there was paperwork that I missed. There was appointments that I missed so far as Social Security was concerned, things like that that weren't making their way rather to me.
Well, it's fascinating that you sitting before me, someone who's worked all their life,
Right.
ready to retire, and in the process of retiring, and in this time of retiring, you wind up becoming homeless because you can't get all the paperwork in. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Right. Because what was going on with my employer, we had settled the work comp claim, and the disability claim was over as well. So we had a parting of the ways, and I basically retired from that, and then I started working on my platform so far as homelessness and mental illness was concerned, because that's what I decided, God called me to do.
So that's a wonderful transition.
Right.
Because you found yourself homeless, you found yourself dealing with mental illness, and instead of having it be a burden, you decided to let it be your work in the world.
That's
your calling.
Correct. My calling.
Your calling. Right. So let us take a moment and look at this book that you wrote. Now, we've been talking for several years now, and you told me you were going to do something. And here it is. So let me show the audience. This is the book we're talking about. And it's called Forgive Me My Trespasses. And written by my friend here, Ramona Bridges. So can I ask you to please share when this started, how you got started telling your story, and how you've come to create this book?
I started back in February of 2014, and I had monthly meetings with my editor, and we did a lot of brainstorming as to what the book needed to be comprised of so far as my story was concerned. And there's probably some stories in between there that weren't part of the book, but we didn't want to wait any longer, for the book to be published because so many people, as everyone knows that's listening out there, have died in the process of being in police custody. And I didn't want to see that happen to anyone else. Not that I'm bashing, the law enforcement, but again, I didn't want to see that happen to anyone else.
Yes. Well, that's very interesting. So you started watching some of the stories, or you were aware of the stories of local situations as
Right.
well as around the
National.
country.
That's correct.
Where homeless people with mental illness had confrontations with the police
Right.
and lost their lives.
That's correct.
So that part of that was an inspiration to you, or a push.
Right.
In addition to your own experience, it sounds like you said, I better get the story out so that other people can hear it.
That's correct.
Okay. And how did you come up with the title?
Well, the comical side of it is I had multiple trespassing charges, and my bail at one time was up to $60,000
Oh, my goodness.
from having multiple trespassing charges. And the other side is the biblical side, so far as the Lord's Prayer is concerned. And Reverend, well, I can't say names, but when the documentary gets released, a certain minister will be explaining more in depth what the biblical side really entails, and she explains it very well.
Okay. Wonderful. So I love that you had some trespassing violations.
Yes.
So there was some reality to what was going on.
Oh, definitely.
And were they taken away? Do we have an end of the story?
I think the end of the story is that all those trespassing charges, thanks to a certain individual at a certain organization, have been expunged. Every last one of them. It took a while to get that done.
Yes.
But thanks to being at a clinic
So you
for
went to
Prop
one of the-
47,
Wonderful.
Prop 47,
We
I ran
actually
into
had
someone.
a discussion about that here.
Right.
And some of the people who are putting Prop 47 clinics on were in our studio. That was a year ago in April. And so I'm glad that you're one of the recipients of the work that was done there.
Right.
Yes, excellent. Well, why don't you share one of the stories that you have in here so that our listeners may be enticed to buy a copy.
Okay, one of the stories is where I read there was on my LinkedIn page, there was an individual that and I were communicating back and forth, and I thought we were going to connect. He has a magazine he has a magazine called the Family Journal, and he took exception to me, I guess, so far as not wanting anything from him, and so far as communicating with him and getting to know him and trying to see maybe how we could support each other. And I wrote an open letter to him, so that's part of my book. So I'm proud that I was, self-directed enough to write that letter to him.
Well, do we have a caller on? Okay. Well, why don't you begin reading that?
Okay. Spiritual matters In check, sir, this is often my reply to offensive conversations. I reference a chant often used at the church I attend. Truth, and I'm going to skip the name. Truth is a very important word, and I submit your truth is not the truth. THEE. Part of the lyrics to the chant I use are "It ain't complicated," referring to seeing the God in me. I also refer to the use of the prefixes "un" and "dis" and the words "here" and "able." The use of these prefixes and words spoken to my inner ear brings up the word "know." I feel led to remind you that able can also be an appropriate word when used to affirm the brilliance and inherent ability of citizens who some view as limited. Oftentimes, my peeps pardon the vernacular, and I are able to use the word know as a revolutionary statement rejecting these views. And again, to the notion that we can achieve our dreams and goals, I say a resounding no. The word no also appears in the word diagnosis. Sometimes it's quite disheartening. You asked what my motivation was for contacting you. There is no specific motivation or agenda other than sharing my truth and offering another perspective. One of my personal mantras and favorite sayings is, character is how you treat those who can do nothing for you. That being said, I try to operate in the universe without an agenda. Mostly I expect nothing in return for the things I say or do for others. I expect nothing less of anyone who works in a spiritual leadership capacity. The other perspective I want to present comes from one of my favorite songs from the Broadway play Wicked. I paraphrase, I've heard it said that people come into our lives for a reason, often bringing a lesson we are set to learn, and we are led to those who are meant to help us grow if we let them, and we help them grow in return. I finished the song for myself. My family familia consists of the entire human race, labels in place and ready to check all of the above. I am a spiritual being, a human being, a female, African American, abled, and same gender loving woman. I work for God. I am here to end homelessness and poverty one person at a time. I am here to address the stereotypes of people who society sometimes views as social rejects. I have just outed myself to someone I felt needed to hear truth from someone who lives her truth every day. Last but certainly not least, while listening to a very motivating sermon by a certain minister who shall remain unnamed.
We're going to stop here.
Okay.
And let them wonder
Okay.
what the end of the message is. Yes.
Okay.
And I wanted to share something that I was moved by. In this book, Ramona Bridges wrote, one of the worst experiences was when I was handcuffed to the bench alone. I was so afraid and really thought that would be the end of my life. The police had me in restraints for indefinite periods of time. Mentally ill people should not be treated this way. We are sick. We're not criminals. We need treatment. We need care. We need to connect with our families and friends. And then I jump over to another note that you have. I talk a lot in this book about training and educating law enforcement on how to handle mentally ill, homeless citizens. They have to understand that we are people. We are someone's family member. So those are very powerful and profound words. I appreciate you taking the time to write them, to share with us today part of your journey. And I know we didn't capture the depths to which you have gone and lived. But I thank you for being willing to share who you are with the world, to be vulnerable, to open your life up to the world where you have been able to admit that I've been homeless, I've been mentally ill, I have had to deal with law enforcement, I've been in hospitals, and yet still I rise.
Thank you.
And we're coming close to the end of the program. I'd like to thank you again And why don't you give us a closing thought?
My closing thought would be one of the things that I talk about in the book. My editor asked me what is my goal or my life vision for the book and what I would like to do. And I'd like to be an international spokesperson for homelessness and mental health.
Beautiful. And I want to say to you, thank you again. We get to walk past, drive past, live beyond the mental illness of many. There are homeless people in Los Angeles. We have many homeless people. And you're a reminder that they are people first,
Right.
and homeless second.
Right.
So I applaud you. I applaud your faith and commitment. And also know I speak to those who lead spiritual communities and centers that the work you're doing makes a difference for people. When you have a place of safety for them to come back, for them to be supported and guided and prayed for and listened to and given resources, your work makes a difference. So I thank all of those who are listening. My thanks to the wonderful and magnificent Larry Yates. And this is the Larry Yates As Is show. We're signing off. And as Larry says every week, a nation can rise no higher than it elevates its women. Peace out.